All right. Well, over to the office, we get a live podcast.
Yeah. We just whipped out a great one for Eastmans Elevated. It left me fired up for lunch, I'll tell you that. We broke for lunch and we came back and we're talking more elk hunting now.
Yeah, you were shouting at me after lunch. I could tell you were fired up. So, no, it made for a great conversation. This was a great podcast. So it's like a two-parter just about hunting elk. And, both just great conversations.
Yeah, we dove in to the intricate details of the peak rut, basically, is what all our rabbit trails revolved around, was the peak rut and the ins and outs and all these nuances that you have to be dialed with if you're going to make it happen during the chaos of estrus, which is an incredible time to elk hunt, but can be challenging too.
Yeah, the chaos of elk hunting, trying to get a shot and a range and then tactics. So, yeah, this is a great podcast. So we'll get right into it. We just want to thank a couple sponsors. So I want to thank Eberly Stock. We've got the mainframe right here behind us. Carrie-Ann, whose bull is that?
This is Ike's.
Oh, nice.
It's a Colorado bull, I think, right there at 338 or 340.
Yep. So we've been using their packs. You use that mainframe with like the Vapor Series packs, or do you use a different bag on those?
Nope, I use the Vapor on the mainframe. I've been using that a lot of years, packed a lot of heavy weight with the mainframe. So
I like that new Kite 4800 too, and the Kite Day Pack. I use those both of those packs a bunch.
I need to show you the Free Fall.
What?
It's the new one from Eberly Stock. I like it better than the Kite. It's in my office. I'll show it to you.
Oh, wow.
That's the one I brought to New Zealand. And
Okay.
it's a day pack, but it has like a legit tubular frame, so you can put some heavy weight on there.
Oh, I got to check it out.
So yeah, remind me. I'll show that to you. That's
Okay.
a sweet pack too, new
Yep.
for 2024.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, great price point, great company. So we sure appreciate their support here on the podcast. Also want to thank G5 Arrows. So you've already put these arrows to work, huh?
Yeah. They flew true for me.
Yeah.
Everything I shot at died, so they work.
They're a great arrow, just great components. I'm really happy with mine and the groups I'm shooting. Great straightness tolerance, great weight tolerance. And like I say, that front end collar that fits over the connection between the outsert and the arrow just makes it absolute bomb proof.
Your arrow is only as good as your insert and oversert, right? Your front end stuff. I've shot all types of inserts and overserts and all the different combinations. And I've had failure and I've had unsuccessful hunts because of failed inserts, encountering bone and just breaking. And so, yeah, your arrow is as good as your insert, bottom line. And so, yeah, they fit the bill. So I'm stoked to have them on board and to shoot them. They're brand new this year. The stacks and what's the other one?
It's the G5. Gosh, you put me on the spot. I can't think of it now.
I forgot it too. I was on the spot too, and I can't come up with the name.
But
the Mark series.
Oh, there you go.
The
yeah.
Mark and the stacks.
Yeah.
Phenomenal arrow. The Mark has like a woven carbon, so like incredibly strong arrow. You pay for them too, but they're premium as premium gets.
Yep.
And then the stacks are more of a basic, a straight carbon, multi-layered, quality arrow. You pay less for them.
Bushing on the back and then a great consistent knock with a good fit on the string. So, yeah, just a great arrow. So, yeah, thanks to those guys for their support of the podcast. And, we just want to mention the Elk Collective. We're talking elk hunting in these couple podcasts. So, go check it out. You're sure to cut your learning curve by all these great elk hunters that have submitted great content for this Elk Collective.
Yeah, the elkcollective.com. You can also find it on eastmans.com. But it's a monstrous video course for you guys that don't know, that it cuts the learning curve. Everything from planning to meat care to calling to gear to
spot and stock, you name it.
Spot and stock hunting. Yeah, everything elk hunting, it's in there, and it's a video-driven course. It's extremely user-friendly to go through this course and just load up that toolbox before you go elk hunting this fall. So I'm excited with it, about it. We're adding a ton of content in the next couple months, from everything from more bow hunting to some of our gear specific mentalities to rifle hunting, dealing with outfitters, horse stuff, like a ton of cool stuff. So I'm excited to produce the content and to get it out there to you guys too.
Also the podcast segment. I think that's going to be powerful.
Yeah. So that's another thing. We're going to do Elk Collective specific podcast too, and throw in some podcasts from other great elk conversations in the past to put in there, but that'll be the only place to find some of that elk collective specific podcasts is inside the course. So make sure you subscribe.
Yep, 100%. All right, man, got the magazines, Beyond the Grid. They're editing your elk episode. Can't wait to get my eyes on that thing. Check out everything we're doing. And, yeah, let's get into this podcast. It's a great one.
Heck yeah, let's do it.
Okay. All right, rock and roll.
Heck yeah.
Still talking about elk.
It doesn't get any better.
No, it doesn't.
I love elk. I mean, I love bow hunting, everything, but there's just something about elk.
I do too. It's elk have to be the most thrilling species to chase around. They're so big, and then all those antlers. It's just so exciting. It's one of the reasons it's like really tough to keep your cool on a big bull and place a perfect arrow into him. And elk are always moving. It's not like it's just different than a mule deer where I can range find it and take my time and execute. I mean, I'd like to do that on elk as well, but it just seems like stuff happens really quick with elk.
Mm-hmm. And there's a fine line between rushing a shot and just taking advantage of your opportunity because it's so small. And that's hard to do. That's hard to put it together, even though they have a 30-inch tall brisket chest, that's a big target. But when you're you're amped up, you're in a hurry, you have a small window, they're chasing cows. I mean, all these different scenarios that can play out, it's not easy.
You're right. It is this fine line between seizing your opportunity and forcing an arrow. And they have a big vitals, but that can fool you as well, is elk take a perfect shot. They take a perfect arrow. And you've had a great track record. I've had a good track record on elk. I've just seen with buddies and, I just know that elk are the toughest animal on planet Earth. You have to hit lungs, heart, and liver. You have to get in that center, or you won't get that bull. And so you got to be careful not to force the wrong angle, not to force in between branches, really wait for your right shot. But then too, when he is broadside or quartered away, you have to put that arrow in there.
Yeah, super tough. And I've failed. I've made bad decisions in the heat of the moment, just a split second to make a decision, and I've made the wrong decision. And I've hit him in the scapula, or I've hit a branch, in the past. I think we've all been there, probably. And that's one thing over the last several years that I've just tried to do is the closer the better. If I can just get those suckers under 40 yards, dadgum, my odds just skyrocketed in getting a good arrow in something. But yeah, sometimes there's so many things that can go wrong. There's so many things that can go wrong. And I was watching some of this, and this is a little bit of a rabbit trail, but your brain function, okay? Trying to put everything together and not get tunnel vision and read the bull, get your range, and make a clean shot is one thing. But making that shot is another thing. With the muscle memory and not punching that trigger, no matter what type of release you have, your anchor being right. Because when you're in the heat of the moment, you're not noticing your grip. Your grip better be dialed beforehand, and you better do the same thing every time at the range beforehand, because if you grip your bow wrong, you're going to miss. And it's a fail. That's going to be 100% fail. You torque your bow or you do something different in a hunting situation compared to what you do at the range. That's how finicky bows can be. And so just one thing like that is the difference between failure and success. And so that's why it's so important. And we will get into this too with some of our processes. What do we do at the range? How do we prepare ourselves? The things that you have to put the work in beforehand to make them muscle memory, so you don't have to think about it in the field. Because there's too many other things going on in the field in a shot scenario that you have to pay attention to, and jerking the trigger is not one that you should be paying attention to. And that's hard to do because you're rushed. It's got to be muscle memory, rushed, or maybe it's, you're hurried, and you still have to keep your cool and still go through your process and not jack it up. So it's the dance. It gets even more intense when it's bow hunting elk, when it's fast and furious. And I think that's what we thrive on, right? We love these tests.
Yeah, you're looking for that window of opportunity, but you're right. You just grip your bow wrong, it'll torque your bow and fling a broadhead tipped arrow like way off its mark. You know, it's like there's so many steps, but you know, I like to keep conscious in my shot, but I'll tell you, I can't think about setting my grip when I'm shooting at a bull. Like you're reacting to the situation, and that bull's moving through and he's chasing a cow and he stops in a window. And so I think, you know, there's a few critical details that you have to have right. You have to have the range right, and you have to be able to add and subtract. Like if you got a range on that bull and he takes a couple steps, you got to be able to, add that yardage and then make your shot, which is what I did on my bull last year. Had a range, turned, started walking away, quartered away, added a couple yards, put it through the heart, like maybe 4 inches low of where I wanted to hit, but did the math in my head, where if I hadn't done that math, I would have missed that bull. And so there's a few critical details that you have to pay attention to. And then in my shot, like I have a process, but you're right, it has to be muscle memory. You have to practice in all these different scenarios and really test yourself leading into season so you can count on that. And then there's just a couple things that I keep in my conscious mind when I'm shooting. So I have this whole process of how I shoot and how most of mine is like a draw, anchor, put the pin where I want it. Here we go, pull, the shot breaks. But that gets condensed down when I'm shooting at a bull to stick the pin where it goes, pull. That's like that's my shot sequence when I'm shooting at a bull. So if I can keep those two things in presence of mind for me, that works. And just that stupid thing of putting my pin where I want it, I just put that pin where it goes on the bull and I don't punch it off there. Like the difference between a good and bad shot is a second. It's just letting your pin float where you want it, no matter how you execute or how you do it. So that conscious telling myself, okay, put the pin where you want it, and all of a sudden I'm anchored up, I put the pin where it goes, and then I tell myself like that, pull, and usually I get about one pull out and the arrow breaks, but at least I start that process of letting it float, pulling on my shot, and then the shot goes, and that's what I have to do to make a good shot. But you're right, it has to be in your subconscious. So you get your bow dialed, you get it shooting broadheads really well, and then the practice really starts.
Yep, 100%. And that's, you were talking about in the moment. I mean, range is number one, right? On a moving bull elk. That's what probably 95% of my brain power is paying attention to when it's about ready to kill. Because that's everything, the distance, right? If your distance is off, and that's something that changes so quickly. Whereas your process, your shot, it hasn't changed. That's nothing. That's what you've practiced. That's what you've prepared for. That's all these different situations that you've put yourself through at the range in the spring and the summer before you go hunting. That's nothing. That's a static. But hunting, a shooting lane, that's probably another percentage of what has to go right. And that range is so important. And then computing that to your sight. And I will say I have caught myself in trouble with a single pin slider before, because like things are happening quick and my sight's set for 30 and this bull comes rushing in and I know he's close, but how close? And you hold right on and you fire. But guess what? He was actually 17 yards and you just hit him high. Whereas if you had a 7-pin fix, it's close. You're going to use your top pin, right? Top pin distance. We talk about that all the time. And your top pin's probably 20 yards. You have a higher odds of hitting a better shot when you have fixed pins at very close range, in my opinion, with how I have my sight set. Because I have my sight set at 30 yards. And then at 20, I'm about this much high, like 5 inches high. And then at 40, I'm about 6 inches low. So if I have time to think, it's no problem. But that 4% of the time when I have to make a really rushed decision and that bull is 16 yards and my sight's set at 30, that's brain power to make yourself hold low because you know that your sight's set high. And that's like too much thought, right?
Yeah,
You know
totally.
exactly what I'm talking about.
Totally.
And so that's a downfall of a single pin slider.
But it can happen on a multi-pin slider too. You're rolled for a longer shot. Say you've got a 20, 30, 40 and you're rolled for 55, and then you go top pin and your top pin's actually 35 instead of 20. Like there's a bunch of mental errors that can happen there.
Yes.
And you are going to make a mistake on a slider, maybe not on an animal, but you're going to make a mistake in the field. Take note of that. Always know that your sight is in its home position. Take note of where you roll that slider and where you roll it back and knowing your pins. And I do shoot a multi-pin slider. I really like it, but I tend to roll for almost every shot, it's the exact yardage. But yeah, those mental errors, or like you're saying, you hit him with a range and he starts to walk and your range changes by the time you get drawn back and anchored, and then you put that pin on the wrong, your pin set for whatever, 55, and he's 57 or whatever. So those mental errors, it's tough to think through everything, but I think you simplify it and then practice with it. Like range finding, you said how much brain power it uses of yours. Like we need to practice with our rangefinders, and there's different settings on rangefinders. Like I know first target priority mode, last target priority mode, best target priority mode. My new rangefinder, the Kilo 5K Sig Sauer, it's on best target priority mode. But I used to like last target priority mode because I could shoot through grass and things. Yep. So getting a range, it isn't like he's standing in a golf course.
That's a science in itself.
Oh,
getting a real range.
Dude.
Right?
Yeah.
It's hard.
Yeah. Shooting through the grass or coming up over the hillside just enough to expose yourself to get a range. And so I think practice with that rangefinder. I think it's 3D shoots. I think it's walking around the mountains, hitting stuff and kind of getting yourself. And you can also pick up a branch with your rangefinder, and then it always takes me, like, unless stuff's really happening quick, I'm most of the time going to I want that same number to pop up 2 or 3 times on my screen. I'm going to hit it a couple times to make sure that's the right range before I shoot it.
100%. I like 5 times because I know 2 of those are going to be bad because I'm shaking or something. It's a giant bull and I'm hurried. And the more I'm hurried, the more I shake. Yeah. And I'll get junk ranges. I'm just range, just getting as many ranges as I can before I go to set my sight or go to know when I'm going to shoot. Mm-hmm. Like it's tough.
Oh man, is it tough?
It's tough.
Yeah. And things happen quick as well. Where elk are just always moving. Like sometimes getting in range isn't the toughest thing with shooting a bull. It's getting them to stop. It's getting them on the right side of the cows. It's getting them, they have a knack for stopping with a tree right in their vitals or a brush right in their vitals. And so then, those instincts that we always talk about kick in. It's like, oh, do I move to the left a little bit and try to get a shot? Well, maybe if its head's blocked. If its head's not blocked, then you got to stay frozen and let them walk out. But they just have a knack for not giving you the right shot or the right angle or brush in the way. And so it's like you have to be patient, but you just really have to find that right window, and everything's got to be perfect when they stop.
And that's the challenge of the peak of the rut. And this kind of comes into where we left off on a prior Eastmans Elevated episode where we talked about pre-rut. What a great podcast that was. Mm-hmm. But this moves in. This is kind of why we're going this route. This is where I find myself the most in this chaotic frenzy of trying to put it all together is the elk rut, the peak of the rut, the bulls moving, pushing cows in and out. Like that bull is not staying still for very long. Mm-mm. And this is where I have the most trouble making a good, clean shot because the windows are so small. And so just to be aware of, that's why we're talking about it, is you guys got to be aware of how crazy it can be and the importance of doing all this pre-prep at the range in the field before season is so important. Mm-hmm. Because some periods of the rut, or maybe mule deer hunting, like you brought up, you have a little more time. You can set your sight, you get your ranges. Maybe you're waiting on a bedded buck. It's a nice controlled situation. But an estrus cow with a rutted up bull, There's nothing controlled about that situation.
It's chaos. That bull I shot last year, I crept into range of the herd. He was bugling right in the morning, positioned myself right with the wind, got in close. The cows fed right into me at like 40 yards, and they don't know I'm there. I've got a perfect wind. Well, the bull decides to go up to the cows around 70 yards and chase them, and I think he's just going to walk out of my life. And then here comes his satellite bull. And satellite bulls, like on the podcast before, it was my worst enemy. Well, this time it was my best friend. He starts chasing the cows at 40 yards. This bull comes back to chase him, and he chases this satellite bull right into me. Like, I had to duck behind the hillside, and this bull came to 5 yards of me before walking by me. And then I got my target bull that then I got a range on and then walking away. I mean, it was absolute chaos. And then to heart shoot that bull, it's just like that experience. We've been there so many times, but yeah, elk hunting is chaotic. And so these drills are this preseason prep. It's like you get your bow dialed, you get your broadheads dialed, and then you shouldn't be shooting on level ground again. You know, you should be shooting on uneven terrain, shooting off 1 foot, shooting kneeling. You should be doing sprints back and forth, get your heart rate up. I do mine while doing pull-ups, while doing push-ups, so my arms are super shaky. 3D targets, angles, like all this stuff. And then the pressure, shooting with buddies and like all of this stuff, like really helps you in those chaotic moments to then make a good shot because you've done it under all this duress, all this stress, like the whole preseason. I think it's really important.
It's so important. And I think, you know, once you get to that point where your bow's dialed, you know it's 100% dialed with broadheads, like it's time to move away from a target, and we're not aiming at a bullseye anymore. I think that's bad if you're going to transfer or go from, you know, shooting at a spot on a target to bow hunting on an animal. So that's why 3D is so important. Don't worry about the rings on a 3D target, shooting at 12 or, you know, whatever, who cares? Shoot angles and get used to picking a spot on a brown body and being comfortably mentally with sending that arrow. Mm-hmm. I think that's so important.
Oh, you're so spot on.
Yeah. Like shooting dots, you know, it's great. Sight your bow in. It's great. But 3D, getting ready for season, that's so, so important.
What you're saying, picking a spot on a total brown target or just a 3D, you can even get some sort, there's just no red bullseye on it, you know? And so you have to like realize the float of your pin on a 3D target and what's acceptable and what's not, you know. And it does wonders shooting at a 3D and shooting those angles. It's when you're shooting a quartered away animal, you want to aim for the offside shoulder is always like a good rule of thumb. Elk, you know, like I say, they take a perfect shot. Yeah. And so when you're making a shot on an elk, don't just think they're a big target or take a long bomb. Like you said, the closer you are, the better your odds. It's like, you really want to give yourself the best chance of success. I've heard so many horror stories about bulls being lost or not recovered. I like I say, I've had the experiences myself. I've seen it with buddies. It's like if you don't make a perfect shot, you don't get them. But once you get good at making a perfect shot on elk, they walk over and die. Yep. It's like they can't live without their lungs, heart, or their liver, you know? And so like you just want to get really good so when you get in that moment, you make a perfect shot. And then when you make a shot on a bull, the story isn't over there. It's like really pay attention to the details. Like it's easy to get pumped and pound your fist, but really pay attention to the last spot you saw that elk, which direction he was headed. Like pay attention because you're going to have to CSI that crime scene. And even on a great shot on a bull, sometimes it takes them a while to start bleeding and pretty soon, or it can rain on it or whatever the case is. And you're going to have to CSI this bull. And even on a good shot, a bull can carry 300 yards, 400 yards before he dies, which can be tough to find.
A perfect shot is only good and perfect if you find that animal with its feet in the air. But until you find that animal with its feet in the air, you have nothing. Yeah, you completed that next step in the hunt, and you think you made a good hit. You know, video review is very handy as we've, had, that's been a very handy tool, is maybe you're not on, sure of a hit, and you go back and you look at the footage and you kind of get a more clear picture of what actually happened. But it's not over. And, we'll do a little celebrating, after making a hit. We've done this long enough, you made a good hit, and we're celebrating the next step. We're not celebrating that we killed something, because guess what? It's not over. We've all been there. And I've hit bulls so good and just have not found blood. Maybe it's taken me 2 hours to find that bull. I find them, but it's not just black and white all the time just because you think up here you center punched that buck or bull. Mm-hmm. And then you get times like you hear stories, but then you talk yourself into thinking you made a better shot than you really did. Or other guys will talk themselves out of it, which is how I like to be if I can, is like, I don't know. I don't know if I hit him that good. Maybe I think I did, but I don't know. I'm not going to get my hopes up. Let's give him some time. Let's not rush into anything. That's the better mindset to have than saying oh yeah, I know I smoked him. Let's go barreling in there after him. I don't like doing that. But what I do like is watching them fall over dead within eyesight. That's what I like. Yeah, that's what I like celebrating. Yeah. And honestly, that's one of the reasons why I started shooting the evolution hide. Mm-hmm. Is, I was a fixed blade guy from way back, and this is a bit of a rabbit trail, but I've just, over all the years and all the kills with the evolution hide with a hybrid broadhead, I've seen more animals die within eyesight than anything else with any fixed head. And that just makes your life a lot easier. Mm-hmm. And so that's super important. But yeah, there's these steps that you have to take, just because you think you made a perfect shot, that's not necessarily the case. And, I was watching Sam Davis's elk hunt yesterday.
Oh yeah, I can't wait to watch that. Yeah. Yeah.
And this really got me thinking about, hits and how you react to a hit. Maybe you're not sure on the shot. It depends on the country you're hunting. But there's been scenarios too where I'll shoot an animal, an elk or a deer or whatever, depending on how he exits the premises, I'll rush up there based on the topography, based on how much I can see of the undercover, because there's been times in the past that I shoot something, I step back, I sit down, I set my bow down and don't do anything. And meanwhile, this bull comes down across, he's hit, and maybe he walks across this opening. This is all 2 minutes later, 3 minutes later, and then he goes over the hill or maybe lays down. The more you can keep your eyes on him, the better. So sometimes, depending on the hit, depending what I can see, depending on the situation, I'll run over there and get on a vantage point immediately so I can see the picture unfold, so I can see what this bull's doing. Because if you can see where he went or where he's going, and that's one reason why I do like hunting open country, is because you can keep tabs of him after you hit him. And, sometimes that bull will go over and maybe he'll go into a timber patch and lay down, and you wouldn't know that happened if you just stayed back from where you shot him from and gave him time. Mm-hmm. And so that's really powerful. But there's other times, maybe it's thick country, or maybe that bull had no idea. Maybe you shot him and he went 30 yards and laid down. You don't want to go over there and bump him out of his bed. And so you got to feel that out, right? That's really tough.
It's those instincts again, right? And it's that same thing, especially if an animal's running down and away and it's I can see the opposing hillside, or I can see the bottom down below me. And it's okay, I know I can get to that spot and look at that bottom or look at that opposing hillside and see him if he crosses, or see him down below me. And yeah, a lot of times that's the difference maker, is you just catch him crossing a meadow or going into the timber to go die, and maybe the blood trail's faint. And so there is a time to go and look and go catch an eye. There's also a time to sit back and not rush in there. Put a good arrow in a bowl and it's all timber in there. You don't want to go running up and jump him out of his bed and get his adrenaline going either, and so it is again, it comes back to these instincts, kind of realizing the right and wrong thing to do. But what you do want to do, you want to make sure you do is pay attention to the last place he saw that bull, the direction that he's headed, any noises you hear, branches breaking, like all those are just clues that you're going to have to piece back together. And then when you're tracking that bull, be careful that you're not stepping on his tracks. You know, one person tracks in front, but you don't need everybody wandering off looking for that bull. It's like the blood trail leads to that bull. Like wandering off and doing a grid search is a last-ditch effort.
Yeah.
Very rarely, once I start to grid search or start to walk off and walk around, I mean, sometimes you wander into a dead one that just, you know, ran off and died. But the most time, once you start a grid search, like your odds of finding that animal go way down because they can take a turn, take a different trail. Like ultimately, I come back to the blood trail, and I follow that until it leads me to that dead animal. Has been my go-to for sure.
Yeah. That's 90% of the time. I mean, if they don't die with an eyesight, then get your Onyx out and start making pins, and that's very powerful too. Because if you do find, you know, maybe last blood and, you know, mark it along the way, and then maybe you got to start doing circles or something, at least you can come back to your starting point. Like you said, more often than not, you're coming back to find last blood, you know, on a crucial stalk, you know, a follow-up. So, yeah, super important stuff.
Yeah. Well, and I want to revisit shooting at these elk again. And I know we talked range finding is an art to practice with that thing, shooting over grass. I also think it's like important to get all your gear figured out. Excuse me. But so like, you know, whatever you're hunting in, you need to be shooting in as well. You need to be shooting with your pack on. You need to be shooting with your clothing. I know as I get into late season that I don't have much clearance on my forearm. So if I'm wearing a puffy jacket, my string hits my forearm and my shot goes low. I found that shooting on animals in the late season, like that's not the place to figure out your gear. You know, so now I always have an arm guard. I have about 5 or 6 of them that I bought. So I've got one in my pack, one in my pocket, one everywhere. So if I'm wearing a jacket, I know I've got to cinch down my arm sleeve so I don't hit my sleeve. That's something I've learned. But it's something that you guys can, like, you know, cut the learning curve and just get it now, or shoot with your jackets on to know that that's an issue. And another thing is the tether on the rangefinder. So it's like get in the habit of doing drills where you have your rangefinder tucked in, you have your bow in front of you, and maybe you're on your knees and you pull out your rangefinder, grab a range, put your rangefinder either back in your pouch, or I like to just drop mine slowly. I don't like to drop it with a bunch of big movement, but I like to put my arm down where it's tight and let it go and then execute my shot. But you need to make sure that tether doesn't get caught in your bowstring somewhere. And also, like, try crouching and moving in on your target and just barely getting a range and, like, putting your rangefinder down or back in its pouch, setting your pin, and then draw your bow and then come up slow, like over the rise, like you would on an elk. You know, do those. The long holds are probably most important on elk. Like, you know, having to draw as a bull comes into a call, like having to hold your draw for 30 seconds and then execute a shot. Holding your draw for a minute and having to execute a shot. Like if you get used to that now, then none of that funny bit. You don't want to have your first time doing it on the bull of a lifetime.
Yeah, absolutely. And that should be your worst fear. And fear drives preparation. If you're afraid of failing on a big bull, and this is probably why I did everything I could when I was younger, is because you hear the stories of these big bulls that got away, and I was like, man alive, I don't want that to be me. And so that scared me into making sure I was prepped from A to Z on every little thing that you're talking about, which I was going to ask you. Do you shoot in gloves?
No.
Do you? So if you're wearing gloves on a hunt, off they come.
Off they are.
100%.
Yep, on my shots.
I don't.
You too?
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, I need that, skin hand contact to really give me that confidence of, a good grip, because that's what it boils down to. And I hunt in gloves, early season or whatnot, but even like a thin glove, nah, that's coming off, because if I didn't practice with it, it's coming off. Yeah. And I'll be the first to admit, I don't really practice much in gloves. Like I have when I have remembered, but as a whole, gloves come off when I shoot.
Yeah, I've practiced a handful of times, but I just don't shoot in gloves. They come off when I'm shooting. When I'm getting close, they come off. The other thing is like, having your release, like, if it's connected to your wrist strap, make sure it's not tucked into your jacket. Make sure that your release is handy. Like mine moves from my bino harness to my pocket when I'm getting close so I can grab it easy. And then two, when you think you're getting close on a big bull, like I don't walk around with a knocked arrow in my release connect to my string. But if I'm getting close and think I'm going to get a shot, that's when I'm going to knock up and get my release connected for that last 20 yards, that last 50 yards as I'm getting close. It saves so much time in the process if you're knocked up. Now, you don't want to be walking around for a mile with a knocked up arrow, but if I'm shadowing elk and I'm getting close and I think the shot's going to come, I'll be knocked up.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, knock up is, early is good. Like you said, not too early, but for the wrist strap index guys, like that's one thing to keep in mind too. I mean, with a wrist strap, that can be underneath your jacket. It can be in a goofy place. I mean, you're bow hunting. You're shooting one shot. So the release might not be settled in to where it needs to be, like when you're practicing at home. And so I'm getting closer, and this is another subconscious thing. I'm adjusting my strap, and I may be doing it, watching the bull or, looking at something else, but I'm adjusting my strap. I'm grabbing the hook in my hand, like it's ready. It's ready. And then, it's just got to be muscle memory. And that's one thing. As I was tying on a new string loop this weekend, I put some custom strings on my lift and tied on a string loop. I like a bright string loop because it's like I can see it without looking at it because it pops out, and also in low light. Like I like a bright string loop, so like a fluorescent orange or a fluorescent green. I like those so much better over like a black or a brown because in low light or out of the corner of your eye, they don't stand out enough. And so I can see my string loop without looking at it and hook on my release because it's bright and it pops out and it catches my peripheral vision. And so that's something I overlook that, but it's very important to my setup. Is to have that really bright string loop.
Smart. The devil's in the details.
It is.
Yeah.
What works for you? What's something that you can, whether you build the muscle memory or something that you can, give yourself that little advantage in the heat of the moment without having to focus on it. The less things you have to focus on, the better, bottom line.
I think that's a great point. I think another thing is like I have an advantage. I shoot a thumb button, shoot it in a back tension style. And the deal with my release is like I can knock up my arrow and I click my release and then I am hands free and I can range find and then I can just reach down and grab my release there. So basically I range find the bull and then I can put my range finder, I can keep my eyes on the bull the whole time, grab my release, and I never have to look down to click in my string loop. So I think that's a major advantage. It saves me a step. But if you do have a wrist strap or you are shooting a hinge or something of that nature, you are going to have to range that bull. You're going to have to look down at your string loop. You're going to have to get onto your string loop, like connect your release to it, and then look back up at the bull. So that step is in this critical, crucial moment of trying to kill this bull, and they see movement so well. It's like a lot of times you look down to click your release and you look back up and that bull's staring at you and you're like, oh no, he saw me move my head, and so that's something that you should practice 100 times over, 1,000 times over before you ever get to season. So that's just seamless for you. And also move so you don't have to move your head so much. You just move your eyes to get it on your string loop so you don't have any extra movement there. But that's something that should be second nature because there's nothing like being shaky on a big bull and trying to get your release onto your string loop to shoot the dang thing.
Guilty.
Yeah, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I've been there.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Can't get it. Yeah.
It's in those details, man. And that's what it'll come down to, whether you notch a tag or not, will be in some of those details. And, those details extend themselves into the stalker movement on those elk. They see movement really well, but it's like one wrong move when eyes are on you, when a cow sees you, or where I make a mistake a lot is I'll get so hyper-focused on the bull with his cow, and I'll like, their eyes are off me, I'm safe, and I go to take a couple steps to get around a tree, and there's some stupid cow down to my right in my peripheral that I didn't see, that wasn't there before, that's staring right at me, and I'm busted, and she'll blow up the whole scenario. You know, so it's like these details, like whether you're calling them or spot and stalking them, they see movement so well, the drawing of your bow, like all of that stuff is going to come into play when trying to kill a bull.
And that's a great point in hunting the peak of the rut. That happens a lot, you know, that your target bull, usually the bigger bulls, are cowed up. And, you know, I think we should move into talking about this because it's so important. In, you know, I can say in the previous podcast, my favorite time or the best time to hunt big bulls is early. But every time of the season is a good time to hunt big bulls. It's just my tactic changes a little bit. And it's hard during the peak of the rut. I mean, action is good, movement's good. You know, you have all these things. But if you're being selective and you're like, I want to kill that bull and there's 80 animals right there, that's hard.
It's a lot.
That's hard, right?
Yeah.
So what are some of your tactics? Like, what do you rely on when you're hunting a big herd like that and you want to kill that mature bull, that herd bull?
There gets to be so many eyes. So the peak of the rut is a great time because you know the bulls are fired up. So they're going to be bugling. And that bugling is like echolocating. You can tell where that bull is by the sound of his bugle. And you got to be careful. It can echo off canyons. He can be facing away from you. He can be facing you. But once you get good at it, you can tell where that bull is. And so, yeah, what I'm going to do when I want to kill a big herd bull and he's got all those cows, and this is the difficulty of hunting bull elk. It's not beating that bull. It's beating all his cows. And so, you know, my tactic is a spot and stalk tactic to move in on these big herd bulls. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take what the elk will give me. It's like I am going to move until I can't move anymore. I know the elk see movement. So if I'm in the wide open or the elk are in the wide open and there's no cover between me and them, I know I can't move any closer. I might be stuck at 100 yards. I might be stuck at 80 yards, and I'm just stuck at the mercy of the elk, and I just hope that bull circles around. Or elk are always moving, and so what I'll do is I'll wait for him to get in the timber, or I'll wait for him to go over a rise, and now I'll hustle to the edge of that rise and try to catch him over the backside. But a big herd bull, you're not going to just be able to sneak in on him. It's more like a shadowing the herd, kind of waiting for your opportunity to be right, waiting for the topography, the undulation to give you a chance to move close enough. But it's, you know, 99 out of 100 times, it's not going to be right when you first see that bull. You're going to have to play the game for a little bit, keep the wind right, keep moving with them. And the main thing for me is just to freeze when they're looking at me. And you can also read when their heads are down feeding and when they're looking up for danger. But really, even in open timber, I'm not going to be able to move into range. Like once I see the elk and they're at 80 yards, I'm stuck. You know, I can't really get much more unless it's just one bull. I can put a tree in between me and him. And it is a case-by-case basis, and it is instinctual based, but you kind of learn what you can get away with and what you can't. And my best way to describe it is I like take what they'll give me. Like what would you say killing a big herd bull during that time of year?
Yeah, I would say I call the least out of, you know, any other stage of the rut is I call the least during the peak, during the rut, is what I have found. Now where the calling really is super beneficial and incredibly powerful is if you're in thicker country, if you're in tight stuff and you have a cow that's close to estrus and a really fired up bull. Just you can tell by his emotion, his passion, his bugling that he's incredibly dominant. He's feeling the rush. He's feeling the testosterone of the estrus cycle and incredibly aggressive and territorial. You get within 50, 60 yards, you get in close and you challenge him. He has one thing to do, and that's to come confront you. And I've had some good encounters with big bulls doing that on herd bulls. Situations it has to be perfect. And it's a small percentage of the time that's going to work for you. Once again, it's got to be thick. You got to have some topography. And just like any type of calling, if they can see where you're calling from, you're not going to fool them. If they can see a line of sight, it's not going to work. So you better have like a massive amount of natural barrier or geographical terrain, whether it's, a finger ridge or a jackpot of timber or something that, you can get in there and press him and then challenge him, and he's got to come around that feature to encounter you and say, get out of here or run you off. But by that time, you're at full draw. He steps around the corner, it's over. So that's where that works really well. But I don't, that's great when that happens, right? It's fun to talk about because it has happened. But, 80% of the time, you're shadowing the herds. And usually you're not in a spot where you can get close enough because of the eyeballs. Mm-hmm. And so, like, I followed a herd for 4 miles until they got to their bed, but they bedded in this really tight box canyon, and I shot the herd bull from the cliff. I mean, talk about a dream situation. Once again, that doesn't happen very often, where they really bedded in a tight terrain area that doesn't, it didn't really allow for them to see much. Like, what were they thinking? They kind of got themselves boxed in, and I capitalized. And then other times it's like in high pressure areas, they know. And so these cows are like Canada geese, in a field. They'll lay down, and then you got the cows on the edges that are up feeding, and they'll be watching. And they're sentries, they're watching because they've already dealt with pressure several times during the season. So that's even harder. And so it's a waiting game, right? You're using the topography, anything you have, and the topography might be just a little roll in the hill of a grassland, mm-hmm. or it might be a coulee, a small coulee, trying to make something out of nothing. If they're in a tough spot, sometimes there's just, you got nothing, mm-hmm. and you wait them out, you don't press them, and you come back tomorrow. And hopefully, if you have that, it's a dance, right? You're knowing when to move, and they get to that spot, and then it's just full throttle, getting up to your spot. You're within bow range. Make it happen quick, because there's 16 cows that are going to see you. And so what an exciting way to hunt, huh?
It is a dance, man. It's an ebb and flow, give and take.
Yeah.
And, I like to hunt elk on their feet. So I'll hunt them in transition to their bed and when leaving their bed. I also find that right before their bed, they kind of feed around and wander around a bit. Sometimes that'll give me an opportunity if I follow them to their bed. If I know the exact positioning of a bull and his cows in his bed, I'll hunt him like a mule deer and try to stalk in there and shoot him in his bed. Most of the time they bed in real thick cover where they don't offer an opportunity. My best chance to kill elk is in the evenings. I get that downhill thermal I can really count on, and they're coming into the parks and into the meadows. And if I can keep my eyes on them, then I can use the ungulation and topography to try to get in close. Elk are also like always moving. So if I can put myself in front of them or cut them off someplace, like that's a great way to kill a bull. And like I stated a bit ago, I've killed a couple bulls too that just go over the top of a rise, and then I sprint to the top of that rise and I come over the top, and they're right in bow range right there. They can't see me coming. So there's like elk is like you hunt them in movement. Like you just it is this ebb and this flow, this give and this take, and you have to keep the element of surprise. The moment you make a mistake, an elk sees you move, they catch your wind, all of a sudden the gig's up and they relocate miles. Sometimes you can keep up with elk and see where they go to, and then they'll calm down and start being elk again. But a lot of times elk are going to relocate zip codes away, and once you bust them once, they're gone. But so you got to keep that element of surprise and just knowing when to freeze and when to hold up and when to move. And it gets so dicey at times with herd bulls, satellite bulls, with other cows, and all of a sudden you're making a play around, and you ran into more elk. There's the elk right there, and have to freeze. And that dance can take hours, and then eventually you just catch one in the right spot or in the right position or the right type of country, and it just comes together. But yeah, that's my elk hunting pretty much.
Well, what you said's really powerful too with, if you find yourself in a position where you're chasing them from behind, or you're following them, you're a step behind them. Yeah, sometimes you can make something out of nothing and get them killed, but try to be a step ahead and get in between where they want to go. Like you're describing with, you hunt them when they're on their feet, when they're moving, they're covering ground. That's when they're susceptible. because they're changing topography, they're changing draws, they're changing terrain, and you can ambush accordingly. And so that's so important. And they call it, I think everybody probably has a different, I've heard a million different ways to describe it, but like a J hook or a cutting them off, or, there's other terminology too, but, getting them located, seeing where they're moving, and then, for lack of better terms, you're running, or you're getting in front of them and cutting them off. I mean, it's probably easier said than done in a lot of cases, because you got to deal with wind, you got to deal with eyes and ears, and then just moving faster than elk can sometimes be very difficult. But that's why scouting and spending time in there is so important, because maybe you can get a little bit of a read on where are they bedding, where are they feeding, and you can get that figured out. Then you can position yourself in a good spot and cut them off. But I mean, more often than not, I go into a new place and I find myself chasing a herd because I don't know exactly what they're doing, and they end up going up this way and I end up behind them.
Oh, always, yeah. And they move country so fast too. And not always, but a big percentage of the time you are tailing elk. And it's just like you just want to kind of keep eyes on them, see where they go, and keep looking for your opportunity to be able to close in and get a shot on them. And that evening is a good time as well. And that's why elk hunting is so exciting, is like you have to make all these reads about the topography and your movement and also the wind, like all on the fly. Like you're just trying to compute all this information, all these tangents, like, and you're trying to like compute it all and not get busted, not get winded, and put yourself into place. But it's like at the core of your instincts. It's not this calculated play usually, it's like this, you're just acting and reacting and trying to make the right moves. And so like that's what I like about the evening so much, is like, okay, I can dial in the wind. I know I'm below them, and usually they're also coming out into the parks and coming towards me, or coming out and into those openings. And it's not a given. I don't kill everyone in the evening or anything. I mean, morning, it seems like you've got pretty good thermals for about an hour before the sun hits too. You've got a good downhill thermal. So it's tough to get on those elk, like, in that hour. And it seems like at first light, elk are kind of feeding around, and then it doesn't take long, 15, 20 minutes, maybe less, and then they start to move towards their bedding and they start rolling timber. So it's tough to get on them when they're out there feeding in the parks in that morning. So like a tactic I like to use is like, starting my hunt an hour or 2 hours before light, and then, positioning myself, hearing that bugle and positioning myself close to where I'm going to get a chance at morning while I've got that first hour where I've got those thermals right. Then they start to change around. They get fickle. Maybe you can still dial in the wind a bit, like in the shaded timber, it's still coming down. And so you can play it for another half an hour in there. And then you have your directionals as well. And sometimes if you got like a storm coming in, you've got a strong directional you can kind of play, but you're constantly trying to compute all this information at once. But that's also what makes it so fun.
Right. It's a chess match.
Yeah.
And like you say, the morning stuff, the hunt starts well before daylight in those situations like you're describing. And I kind of encountered a herd like that this last year in Idaho, where they were on private feeding at night, but good grief, they were moving off private and heading to bed before daylight. And so to catch them and cut them off, you'd have to be there probably 45 minutes, before shooting light, or at least be leaving the trailhead, let's say 45 minutes to an hour, because that's how long of a walk it was in there to be in there. Otherwise, you leave at first light, you're going to miss the whole show. And that's what a lot of guys, they leave it at the trailhead at daylight, and you might as well just go out at 11 o'clock
100%,
because you're going to miss the whole show. And so that's so important. If you're not going to get after it early on pressured elk like that, you might as well just do afternoon hunts only. But then again, if you're going out in the afternoon, you have no clue on where to start. Mm-hmm. And so you just got to hunt hard. And I really do find myself during the peak of the rut, during that third week of September, and it's a romantic time to hunt elk, right? Everybody's like, oh, the third week, in which it's great. It really is. But I hunt my butt off during that time to kill a bull. Like you don't get any easy ones. It seems like you're on your A game. You've put in your time. You're getting one step ahead of them. It's rarely a 1 or a 2 day hunt, at least in my experience on public. It takes a couple days to get them figured out, and then you put it all together. But it's a great time to hunt, but it can be very challenging. It really can.
And even more challenging yet is the late season. So it's like we're running out of time, but I just want to cover this briefly. Like, it seems like I kill a lot of my bulls in October. It's like this late post rut. The elk will still rut like crazy. What they do is they start to gather up in big groups, and then either they're the second cycle estrus cows, or they're the calves coming in or something, and like all the cows get together and all the bulls are around these cows, and it'll just make for a rut fest when one comes into estrus. But there is elk everywhere. It's like there's a lot of elk, so it's like a target-rich environment, but boy, they're tough to get close to because they're in such big groups and moving. You get to hunt that late season much?
Yeah, it's hit or miss, right? It's a weird time to hunt them, and you can hit great days where it's great rut action, and then you have some slow days, or probably more slow days.
Yeah, where you hear nothing.
Yeah, you hear nothing. But I will say, it is a good time to catch a big old bull by himself or with 1 or 2 cows or something. And I've seen this in the past at the end of estrus, maybe the end of the 3rd week or into the 4th week. You'll have a herd bull, like a big bull, and you're like, geez, that thing's badass. He's the dude. And then the next day, he's not with those cows anymore. He went and moved on to somewhere else or roaming somewhere else. And that right there is a really susceptible time for those bulls to be called in. Is they leave cows, or they're searching for new cows, or by themselves. Once again, you can call them in like a puppy dog. They come right in. And I have caught bulls like that in October too, where they bred cows, the estrus is dried up here, and they've moved somewhere else, or they're searching for other cows. And I like that first week of October. I do. I've had good action. It's been hit or miss, but I've had really good calling situations. And then other times, some of these old bulls too, I feel like they expend their energy during the peak, and they do it at night. And then in October, they're done. They're not bugling anymore. They're not rutting anymore, and they're done because I guess they're focused on getting through the winter now. But they get good at knowing when to expend the energy and when to be there for estrus. 98% of the time, if you see a herd and it doesn't have a mature bull with it, then probably a mature bull's coming in at night and doing the breeding. And, the other bulls are doing some breeding during the daytime. But, it's kind of a hit or miss time frame to hunt elk.
It can be hit or miss for sure. Yeah, I noticed they still rut. It's just on and off.
Yeah.
You'll get times where it's the craziest rutting action. You'd think it was the 3rd week of September. They're bugling like crazy and all day long. And I've actually chased some of my biggest bulls in that late season. They group up, and the big bulls are around those cows, or maybe they split a couple off, but I do chase some big bulls in that season, and I've killed a lot of bulls in October. So I like that season. It's just hit or miss. Sometimes crazy rutting action, get into a bunch of elk, and then sometimes it's just crickets and you can't find an elk, So it is hit or miss, but there's still opportunity. And what I like too is like all the pressure wanes. Like I have the mountains to myself. And so I really have the elk to myself. So if I can get on a big group, there's nobody else really hunting them or hunting elk. They've kind of given up at that point, or they're looking towards rifle season. And so I really have the mountains to myself, but I've killed a lot of bulls in October, and like you say, I can go out and find crickets, but seems like eventually I can run into a bull, and a pretty good bull, and get an arrow into them. They seem like they're susceptible that time of year, and it's just, if you still got your elk tag and you're an elk hunter, and elk hunting is difficult, man. It's like there's a lot of years I have 20 plus days into trying to kill a 6-point bull. That is a lot of days hunting elk to try to kill a bull, and so some years I'll bring it into that late season, and even right down to the last day of elk season, which is usually around October 15th, So yeah, I don't give up. I call it Rocktober, and I've arrowed a heck of a lot of bulls to save my elk season in October.
And there's some areas that October is the go time,
right?
You know, and it can be hard in some of these southern states, and it's kind of a bummer. You see some of the season dates, and you're like, man, alive! You're like a August 25th opener to a September 25th close for bow season when it comes to elk hunting, like Utah or some of these other states. And you're like, man, you're kind of missing it. And I know a lot of these southern states like New Mexico, like a lot of stuff goes in October. And there's some, you know, usually October in most states, maybe besides Montana, I'm probably missing something else, their rifle seasons by then, you know? And so it almost, it's like, man, a muzzleloader season looks pretty good. Maybe I should go for a muzzleloader tag and then bring my bow. You know, some of those states you can do that because the season dates are so great for some of these southern states, or maybe these lower elevation, more dry and arid units that have elk is another place where they seem to rut later, and I like to gravitate towards that and less weather. I mean, man, hunting elk in the high country in October it's a gamble because a lot of that stuff, you get snow and it can change the whole game. And you go into an area that's full of elk, you get a storm, and they all leave, and your hunt's over unless you're going to relocate several miles. And a lot of time I've heard, I don't know how many stories in this part of the world, in this Cody, Wyoming country, of rifle guys elk hunting, and they run into that. They get snow in there, and then they got nothing. And they're going in, you know, coming out and starting over from scratch, you know, with their horses. So I don't like to hunt the high country late because weather is not your friend.
Yeah, they seem to really push down. I've got some spots, quite a few locations that I just know how the elk migrate through country. I know their winter range, and I know where they show up, and it's like a clock. Like that weather comes in, I'm smiling ear to ear because the biggest bulls are going to pile out of the mountains into these spots, and in October, nobody's there. It's like I'm licking my chops when I see snowstorms. But it's just different from area to area. It's why it's good we can get together and talk through this, because we have different experiences with different times of year in different areas and different states. It's like elk hunting, it's don't make any rules because they'll probably break them, you know? They'll do what you don't want them to do. But that's why it's so fun to get together and talk elk hunting. So make sure to check out the Elk Collective. We're putting together a bunch more content there. There's already a bunch of incredible content there, so you can definitely cut the learning curve. Still have the mule deer course and things, but yeah, you're doing a dang good job with that thing, Dan.
Yep. A lot of fun stuff come down the pike, content dump, and you know, it's elk. We love doing it, and we love talking about it, and we love just gathering knowledge and getting better at it. So that's what it's all about.
That's it. All right. Good work.